Hey everyone, it's Alexis. For those that don't know me, I am a queer and non-binary practitioner based out of Kansas City. And I'm here today to talk about my new upcoming class, which starts November 1st. The class is called Dying Beautifully, Energy Embodied for Autumn Endings and Living in Right Relationship. And so I just wanted to talk about why. Why am I offering this class right now in the fall of 2022? Out of all the things that I could be offering and all the things that I could be doing with my time, why am I doing this? And why might you, out of all the things that you could be doing with your time and money and energy, want to engage with this work? There's a few reasons for that. The first, just like diving into the name a little bit, because I'm just one of those people. I like to pull something apart, look at it from every angle, put my little slab of glitter or whatever nail polish on it so that it really becomes something that I can see and mold and own and experience. And there's a reason why I shifted the name. The original name for this work is called Energy Body Mastery. And that's a really important lineage that I'm a part of that I've been training to hold for several years now with my teachers at Last Mass Center. But the reason why I switched the name around and wanted to put my little fall flavor on the class is because I really wanted to link into what is so pregnant for this work now for me. Like, what does this work seem to have that's so ripe with potential that I can't not put it in the name, right? And so I really dove into this summer, like what I was seeing and experiencing in my travels, which were actually a really challenging time for me as I've left Kansas City, spent a month in New York, et cetera, have come back. We left an apartment and we've now moved into a new house and all of this stuff. And I kept coming back to the necessity of this right relationship with death. And that's always been baked into the teachings. I didn't just add that because of like it's fall. It's always been baked into these teachings. Death is an energy that we work with as an ally from kind of the very beginning. And so it's really important in these teachings. It's central. But what felt like it was necessary to highlight is how out of relationship we are with that energy now. So to land this in the arc of my last few years, one of the first teachings that I received when I was navigating what I was going to do with my life, around 2019, but where I wanted to live, my grandmother died. She died at the age of 101. And while it was, in a lot of ways, it was a really good death, right? She had a good life. She was well supported through her life. She was able to leave, an inheritance that was really generous to a lot of her heirs and all of that stuff. And it really enabled me to do what I needed to do in the next several months after that. But I was spurred by that experience of coming home for her funeral to actually like look at what was happening in my family at that time and realize that I wanted to be more involved and that I actually felt like I needed to come home to this place that had always been essentially my origin point, which I had basically been running from my entire life. And the only way that I was able to functionally do that was through these teachings, through energy body mastery and clearing, which I offer as energy embodied once or twice a year. And why I think it's really like interesting to bring that up now is there was so much that I had to let die in order to actually give birth to the me that could say, hey, mom, hey, dad. I know we've had our wildly up and down periods, but I think I want to move back home. And what's required for me to do that? What do I need to repair within these relationships? The reason I was able to really even approach that idea, which I think a year or 2 years or 3 years prior would have seemed like, nope, never. Even the last time I had been there before the funeral, I remember being like, no, I will never move home. LA is my home. I don't care how displaced I feel from it, whatever. It was all through these teachings, through the clearing work that these teachings offer and the energy body mastery work that these teachings offer that allow us to choose center, even when our fear and our trauma and da 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 want to like pull us in all different directions, to actually be like, center is here where my purpose is. What's the next step? And to be like, wow, I'm going to move home. So I did move home. I lived with my parents for 17 months during the pandemic because, I moved home in January 2020 thinking like, la-di-da, I'll just stay here for a few months. And then around March, when I was ready to start to come out of my winter hibernation, my like, wow, I just moved in with my parents after several, like 13 years away, hibernation, then the pandemic happened, of course. And then we were all thrust into this initiation where we were all faced with basically wherever we were in our relationship with death came up and reared its head and shoved itself in our faces. We didn't know if I maybe didn't spray alcohol on the bananas I was bringing home from the store, if I might then risk the life of myself or my parents or my sister or my nephew or anything like that. It was a terrifying and really challenging time. We lost our other eldest relative in our family due to COVID in 2020. It was really, really hard time. And he died alone in a nursing home. It sucked. It really did. But the thing that helped me navigate it was this relationship with death. And I want to highlight this other teaching that came through that really is the source of this name. So at some point that year, coming into the fall, I remember being like, gosh, man, I'm still living with my parents. Good Lord, it feels like my whole life is on hold, though I've learned so much and grown in so many ways, while so many people around me in my peer group seem to be spiraling, and no offense to any of them, like it's understandable, but really kind of eddying out in their fear and their old stuff that was coming up in new ways due to COVID, and the scarcity, in the judgment, right? Of like who's not taking enough precautions, who's taking too many precautions, all the ways in which everyone seemed to be spazzing the F out at that time. I actually was navigating that experience and just learning, growing, feeling kind of good. And it was weird. There was this complexity to that. And so I remember going to one of my helping spirits who takes the form of a tree. And she's a beautiful tree that in the fall, she was right in front of my window when I was growing up. And of course, I was living in my childhood bedroom. So there she was again. In the fall, she turns this brilliant red. And to be honest, like nothing against her, but most of the time, she's just kind of this normal looking tree, right? You could miss her easily. But in the fall, she just fluoresces. She's exquisite. And I love this tree so much. And I love the whole sort of like larger meta spirit that she is. That's not just limited to one tree, but is maple. And so I was asking Maple, like, what the heck do I need to do? And she just kind of looked at me in the way that spirits do, which is not looking at you at all. But, when you're having kind of a conversation intuitively with spirits, and she was like, you got to learn how to die beautifully, because that's what I'm doing every fall when I give my leaves up. I'm giving the old back to the earth. I'm giving what no longer serves me away. And if I held on to those leaves, they would freeze and they would damage my tissues. So actually, there's so much necessity to this dying. And it's so gorgeous the way she does it. And that really stuck with me for several years. Still, here 2 years later, I'm like, huh. So that's what I want to share, is what these teachings have taught for me about how to die beautifully, how I was able to work with death and the other energies that we work with in these teachings. And it all roots back into working with my own energy, day to day, month to month, season to season, year to year, to be able to let go of what was holding me back, to let go of these old things, emotional patterns, traumas, wounds, just like straight up like boring mental kind of thought forms, all the things that were holding me back, that were actually had become a really profound liability. I was able to let those things go, give them back to the earth, which is a key piece of these teachings, is actually stepping fully into the energetic ecosystem around us, so that we actually are giving our waste back to the environment. And actually that alone enabled me to step through these experiences that I've had this past several years with integrity, with a sense that I'm not just coping, I'm not just like going to my go-to addictions. So of course, there are moments, of course, I'm not some perfect person. These teachings don't offer some promised land free of temptation or, mistakes or anything like that. But I was able overall to look back on the last several years and say, damn, I grew a lot. It was hard. It's been some of the hardest times of my life. But I sit here now in 2022, having done all the work that I needed to do to come back into right relationship with my partner in a new way after a decade of knowing each other, and actually commit to ourselves in a way that is, really seems to be like, wow, this was the thing I was trying to create with my whole life in terms of love and romance and relationship. That we have this incredible house. I have this beautiful workspace, which is just mine for the first time. I really was able to manifest all the things that I came here trying to manifest, all in the effort to seed myself into the root system of this environment, this town, this land, my family and my communities, etc., in a way that I actually become more of a supporter, more of a part of this ecosystem. And that's not what everyone is saying post-COVID. As the challenges of climate crisis and systems collapse and government inaction on one hand and gross abuses of power on the other hand seem to be showing us, a lot of people are really struggling with this period. And I think it's really understandable. And that's why I want to give these teachings ever more so, because I understand how much it is, how easy it is to struggle with just the day-to-day life stuff when you have this huge sense of unprocessed grief, all the people that we've lost personally, all the things we've lost personally. Any sort of like trust in a financial economy might be disappearing before our eyes. Literally this week, last week, this is October 3rd, 2022, unprecedented financial shakeups across the planet. Everything seems up for grabs. So there's grief about that. There's grief about all the millions of people that have died of COVID that didn't have to, the millions of people that continue to die from things like HIV, like starvation, like drug addiction, that don't have to be dying in those ways, or with the fear and with the suffering that this culture dumps on the dying, on the destitute, on the people that are marginalized, people that die due to the uptick of violence, that seems to be never ending. My whole life we've been at war somewhere, somehow, and it doesn't seem to have like an endpoint in sight, right? So there's a lot of grief. There's a huge swell of grief. What allows me to be able to take those moments and grieve, to go out back and exhume my grief and give it back to the land, to go to the water, to go to the fire, to go to the air and the earth, and actually feel my feelings so that they don't drag me down, so that they don't stick me in the past, so that they don't stick me in choices I no longer want to make, because I know that we don't have the carbon, we don't have the energy, we don't have the time for me to doing the same old fucking bullshit. What allows me to be present with that is these practices. And that seems kind of dramatic, right? Because they're actually really simple practices. They're like half hour to an hour a day. You know what I mean? Some of us, it's really just 5 minutes on a Thursday when we got to run out the door, da 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 da. So it's really not this huge, elaborate, shamanic, spiritual, mystical, quantum, this, that, whatever adjective you hear hashtagged nowadays. They're very, very simple. They're very simple practices for balancing, centering, cultivating energy, which is a good one for a lot of us that are feeling really under-resourced and kind of exhausted right now. Yeah, it's exhausting. It takes a lot to feel. It takes a lot to feel things that are like historically unprecedented, amidst all the other people around you who are doing their best not to feel and sort of dumping their emotions around in their wake. It's a lot. So the resourcing piece is really key, the restoration of actually being in the energy and actually working the practices. Because there's a grief that happens just every single night as we finish the day. There's a grief that needs to happen, I should say, at the end of each day. That often we're times we're just blowing right past that into a blue screen. And then we're dumping the melatonin on the brain from the gummies. And then we get up and we jack up on the coffee and we start the whole thing again. And the grief just swells and swells and swells behind us. And it pulls us sideways. And it drives us to choose out of addiction and reaction instead of out of integrity. And the true resourcing needed to actually lean into the discomfort of growth seems completely absent. So that's what these practices answer for me. And that's why right now they seem so important. The third thing I'll just say is I've been learning an ancestral healing form from my teachers. And there's, we're not bringing that into this work at all. But one thing that is so compelling to me about learning the ancestral healing work is that there are such simple things that hung our ancestors up, that hung them up to the degree that they didn't even cross over. They became ghosts, and their small, poor choices, maybe it was even one small, poor choice, snowballed so far for hundreds or thousands of years that it's now become chronic illness, chronic disease, chronic mental unwellness, addiction, etc. There's all these ways in which ancestral patterns, seem to be bursting up like this ugly fungus that we really don't want. Nothing against fungus, because fungus is actually really great and we want it. But like this infection, like this sort of cancer that just kind of explodes. You're going along with your life, and then suddenly, you may be like Ivy League educated, fairly progressive. And then suddenly you get grabbed by something really ugly and you're like marching on Charlottesville with torches, saying they will not replace us, or whatever other kind of crazy expression we continue to see of people being driven by the unresolved issues of their ancestors. It's all over, if you start to like open to that lens. But to step out of that as a sidebar, what is so compelling to me as I do ancestral work for myself and learn to do it on behalf of other people in support in the group is that these choices that set these patterns in motions were really pretty small. And I asked my teacher actually like a few weeks ago, I was like, so basically what you're saying is if people had had a clearing practice, we wouldn't be in this mess. She's like, yeah. And some of the people that had the clearing practices didn't use them. That's a whole other story. But those of us that actually now have access to, the money that we need, the time that we need to devote, I'm asking for 2 to 3 hours of your time for each week for 8 weeks. That's pretty much it. And, maybe 20 to 30 minutes of practice, as many days as you can spare it. And that can be enough to get you in a position where you don't have those small, daily, poor quality choices, those sort of big swells of unresolved, unprocessed, unexpressed emotions holding you back from becoming the person that you're here to be in your life. God forbid, if you were to die tomorrow, we don't want that stuff holding you back so that you don't cross over and you also become a ghost cluttering the field. Any of us, we don't want that. And that's the kind of stuff that also prevents you from becoming the ancestors that we need, the elders that we need, the teachers, the healers, all the people that we need, both in life and in death. We need those people. We need your gifts. And we need all of those people to be fully heart-centered, well-rounded, centered people with the capacity to step back into center when they see themselves step out, to step back on the path when they see themselves step off the path, to notice themselves in reaction and overwhelm and do what they need to resource themselves, and to process the ways in which we habitually find those triggers and traumas coming up because we never got to process that stuff from our early life. All of that potential is contained within these teachings. So it's simple work. It's very practical. You might call it basic, and I'd like to actually reclaim the word basic as like something that's actually good. So calling all the basic blanks, there's something really important that our culture has lost and really just never gave us, you know what I mean? And that's not our fault, but we have the capacity now. People have carried this wisdom through many different traditions and deposited it in many different forms. I'm not saying that this is the only clearing and energy body hygiene practice there is. There's a million right now. It's amazing. Such an exciting time to be alive. And I think we're all responding to this need in our own ways. So this is me responding to that need and inviting you to join me. So the details are all on my website. The cost is sliding scale. If for some reason you can't make that cost in the next month, you can space it out over the course of the course. If for some reason you can't make that cost in any way, shape, or form, I have some pro bono slots available for sure, always with everything that I do. Included in the cost of the course, there's course materials, there's 2 hours of weekly teaching every week, and we do that live online on Zoom. But if you can't make it for whatever reason at that time, you can always take it on your own, during the week, some other time. There's group participation work via Google Docs. There are also partner practices weekly where you get to actually partner with people and support each other and learning the work as peers, which is really fun. Some of my closest friends, like people that I really value, I've met just taking courses like this. So, it's a possibility that you might not even know that you need these people until you meet them. So that's an option. And then you also get one free solo session with me, just so that we can actually kind of dive deep into your unique engagement with this work and make sure that you have the support that you need. And then if you feel like you want more solo sessions with me, either throughout the course or otherwise, then I give scheduling preference to students of the course as well. So it's a lot of fun. I think it's really groovy work, and I really hope you'll join me. It runs Tuesday afternoon, sorry, from November 1st to December 20th. And then this time, I'm actually really excited. I'm gonna bracket it on the end with a solstice ritual. So we get this optional ritual to actually take the next step out of the personal practices into a more spirit-led, spirit-guided practice of doing ritual together at the solstice, which is like the best time to do ritual, right? At least that's what our ancient ancestors said. So I think it's going to be really good. It's going to allow us to dive deep into the rest, the rejuvenation, the deep yin cultivation that is needed at this time, the restoration after an exhausting several years, a pandemic that still seems to be trucking along, while a million other like very, very challenging things, war, famine, political corruption, all seem to be barreling forward unchecked. We can be a part of that solution, and we can refuse to run our bodies, run our lives with the same energetic scarcity and excess that the culture has taught us to do with everything else in the culture. We can refuse that through our practices of learning how to be in our bodies, be in our energy, be connected to the ecosystem, and actually give back in our beautiful dying. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll reach out with any questions, and I hope you'll share the page and the videos and go on my Instagram and check out the materials that I'm releasing relative to the class. And yeah, shoot me a Venmo with your deposit and send me an email to be registered. And I hope to see you on November 1st. Thank you so much.